Thank you.
All right, welcome to Live with Faye on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. We've obviously kept an eye on global politics and the global developments as well. A lot of you have been writing in, talking about the terror attacks in Vienna and France. To just bring you up to speed, there is still a manhunt for the gunmen who fired at citizens in Vienna last night. Now, there were gunmen armed with rifles who opened fire in 6 different locations in central Vienna, killing 3 people and wounding several more. We now understand that death toll could have climbed up to 4. The Austrian Chancellor has called this a repulsive terror attack. This, of course, comes after the attacks that took place in France. Now, interestingly, Austria has been so far insulated from any sort of attack, and this is perhaps the first time something like this is coming up. And we have with us someone who's going to explain to us what's going on in Europe at this time. Delano D'Souza joins me right now. He's a senior journalist at France 24. Delano is, in fact, a former colleague who we used to work together in Mumbai. He's doing really well in Paris. We're all very proud of him. Delano, thank you for joining us this evening and making time for us. It's obviously, I mean, from where we're looking at it, halfway across the world, this is very concerning news coming out of Europe. My first question to you is about the attacks in Vienna. Is the hunt still on? Have these attackers, these terrorists, been captured, or does the government know where they are?
Well, Faye, firstly, thank you for having me. This story, when it broke last night, there was a whole lot of confusion with what was going on. I was actually anchoring the 10 p.m. show here in France, and we obviously got the news about 40 minutes before I went on air of what was happening in Vienna. So we didn't know how many attackers there were, and we still don't know. We know that one attacker has been killed. What happened was at around 8 p.m. local time, there was a shooting that broke out outside a synagogue in the center of Vienna, in the first district of the city. And this was on the eve of a lockdown. A lockdown went into effect at midnight local time in across the country. This, of course, to bring down the rise of infection linked to the coronavirus. So people were out, enjoying their last taste of freedom before this lockdown went into effect. And there was a shooting that happened in outside this synagogue in the city, and then we weren't sure if there was just one act of one attack, and then what quickly we found out was that there were 6 locations that the police were keeping their eye on, and then very quickly from those 6 locations it turned into a manhunt. People were told to stay at home. The public transport around that area came to a halt. And then, of course, at midnight, the lockdown went into effect. And then we had the Czech Republic that shut its border with Austria because, of course, it's the Schengen zone. And so they shut their border to make sure that if anyone did flee, there would be some checks and balances in place. And what we do know now is that they are looking for possible accomplices. Now, the one person that they did kill, they have raided their apartment and found that they were known to the authorities. It's a 20-year-old man who was released from jail in December, who had planned on traveling to Syria.
So tell me something. You did say, and we do know that the firing began outside of the synagogue. Does the police know if the synagogue was a target?
That's the thing. The head of the Jewish community in Austria put out a tweet last night as these attacks got underway, saying that there was an attack that happened outside the synagogue, but clearly because with the coronavirus, I don't think the inside of the synagogue was open, so that I don't think anything happened inside from the information we got. But clearly, one of the eyewitnesses we had spoken to was a rabbi and spoke of shooting outside the synagogue. So I think it's very close. It's very a densely populated part of the city that came under attack.
You did say, of course, that the Czech Republic has closed its borders to Austria, and we do know that there are many countries that are fairly easy to cross in and out of in that space. Germany is fairly close by as well. What is the reaction from the other neighboring countries right now, given the fact that Austria has never been a target for this sort of an attack in the past?
Exactly. Austria, we've not heard of attacks in Austria compared to what we've seen, in Paris, in London, in Madrid. Uh, Austria has not really experienced this sort of jihadist terror on its soil. The reaction was swift and fast. You had the French president Emmanuel Macron, who really put out a tweet while everything was going on last night, and he said, after France, Austria, our like neighborly, brotherly country, has come under attack, and he spoke about our Europe has come under attack. And I think that was an interesting point, because this attack in Vienna comes hot on the heels of that barbaric attack which we saw happen in Nice, where three people were killed by a 20-year-old Tunisian man who had arrived in France just the night earlier.
Now, tell me what kind of security or precautionary arrangements are being taken across France right now. I understand schools are open and the children are going to school. Is there protection for them? What's being done?
So there are 7,000 soldiers out on the streets of France protecting places of worship, protecting schools, protecting town halls. This, of course, in the aftermath of that attack, which we saw in Nice. France has, since 2015, suffered a spate of terror incidents, and there has been this Operation Centennial, which has been in place. It was scaled down to 3,000 troops, but on Thursday it was ramped up to 7,000 troops. Schools have been opened, since they were closed for the All Saints holiday. So the kids had a 2-week break from schools, and now yesterday they got back into schools, and obviously that's one of the targets potentially for people who want to carry out such attacks, given that a school teacher was killed almost 3 weeks ago for showing students cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in a class on civics.
And also, we've had reports from around the world of protests against France, protests against President Macron as well. What is the reaction from inside of France to these sort
of course, France doesn't want boycotts on its goods, but a lot of French goods, I don't know how many people know that they actually are owned by French companies, like your L'Oreal shampoos or Garnier products. They're French. They may not be, they're not a Louis Vuitton bag or an Hermes scarf, but they're still French, and they're very subtle things. So I actually spoke to a friend and colleague of mine who's a correspondent in Istanbul, and I asked her, because Turkey has called for a boycott. The president of Turkey has called for a boycott of French goods, probably one of the only leaders in the world to do so, even though there have been some groups in states like Qatar and Kuwait who've called for a boycott of French goods. I asked her, do you see French products in the supermarket? She's like, of course, and people are buying it because they don't know that a shampoo made by L'Oreal or by Garnier is French.
But is there a division of opinion within France as well to the steps or the statements being made by the government?
See, now what happened is let's go back to the sequence of events, because of course you had that teacher who was murdered, beheaded, walking home. Awful as it is, he was beheaded for showing students cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. This is in a class on freedom of expression. And he was a teacher who knew that these cartoons could offend some. In his class, he told Muslim students, listen, you can look away. I'm not forcing you to look at these cartoons. You can look away. So what happened in the aftermath of that is you had, obviously, you know how when you're in school, you go home, you talk to your parents about what you learned in school. A student has gone and told their parent that they were shown cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. A disgruntled parent went online. It's very easy to go online and, air your grievances about whatever you want to. Somebody caught on to that, and then we had an 18-year-old Chechen who went and beheaded this 47-year-old teacher, Samuel Paty. While delivering the eulogy for this teacher, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, said, France will continue, very defiantly, he said, France will continue to publish these cartoons. And, speaking to a lot of people here in France, we've had a lot of attacks in this country, whether it was the Bataclan being attacked or Charlie Hebdo offices being attacked, or or priests being beheaded in churches, but to target a teacher for showing images of a cartoon to school students, it was just mind-boggling. So even friends really were defiant and really supported Macron in the tough stance he took. But at the same time, he alienated a lot of people in this country, a lot of the Muslims in this country who, okay, they may not agree with publishing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, but it ruffles feathers. Let's just put it that way.
I just want to, pedal back a little bit to the French idea of secularism, which is a very different idea from the rest of the world. And the fact that you did say France does have a large population of Muslims in comparison to rest of Europe, but these are not Muslims who, while some of them might have come in recently, this is part of French history. So this is not, these are rules that were written about 100 years ago. That is there a debate about whether that form of secularism still applies in France of today?
That's a really interesting point, because the French notion of secularism or laïcité was written back in 1905, when France was a very white country, a very Catholic country, few Protestants, potentially a few Jews. That the color of France, the landscape of France has changed, obviously, since the colonization, the end of the world wars. So that notion of secularism and laïcité potentially needs a rethink. But the problem in France is that there's no room for debate when it comes to secularism. It's a beautiful concept. I agree, it is a beautiful concept, but potentially it needs a rethink given the composition of the country has changed.
Quick question also about domestic politics. There have been enough reports also written about the fact that the president might have his eye on the next election. We also understand that there is a sort of right-wing leaning happening within French media as well. Some accusations of Islamophobia. From your point of view, which is a vantage point of view, which of these theories do you think is actually real on the ground?
See, the presidential election is in 2022, and Emmanuel Macron knows that he doesn't really face any opposition from the left, because after the previous election, François Hollande was voted out of power after just serving one term in office. Emmanuel Macron's biggest threat is from the right, from Marine Le Pen. And he knows this. He knew this coming into the presidency, and he knows this for the next year and a half. This is what he's going to have to do. Marine Le Pen has been very clear. She has a problem with, she sees what all these attacks that we've seen happening in Europe due to a problem of integration in this country. And that is another thing which we have to keep reminding ourselves of when we talk about these attacks that take place in France. In the past, Faye, we have had a question of French integration, where we had a lot of people going off to fight for ISIS over in Syria and Iraq. That has changed. When we look at these attacks that have happened in the past month alone, we haven't seen any first group trying to claim these attacks. The boy who carried out the attacks in Nice, he arrived in the country a day before. He was not born and bred in France. Last month, we saw an attack outside the former offices of Charlie Hebdo by a Pakistani refugee who arrived in the country a couple of years ago. So again, not somebody who was born and bred in France. So integration has not been an issue, really.
And finally, since you live in Paris, is there a sense of nervousness among citizens? And we know you've gone back into lockdown, so people are not moving around as much as they used to. But are people a little nervous about what's around the corner, or who they're bumping into, who they're talking to?
See, the French are very resilient. I've lived here for 10 years now. After 2015, when really it was a tough year. 2015, particularly November 2015, I have never seen Paris that empty. The day after the attacks on the Bataclan, I remember it was a Saturday night. It was dead, deserted, but the city bounced back, the country bounced back, and the country continues to bounce back. I actually had the Nice attack on my watch last Thursday. I was presenting the afternoon show, and it really, you know how it is to cover terrorist attacks. It really drains it out of you. But we were going back into lockdown, and my friends decided to have a last minute drink, and we saw people outside, and people were out making the best while they could. Uh, but clearly, yes, this is. These attacks are on a topic on everyone's minds. Everyone is talking about it, but a lot, politicians need to do a lot to try and bring the country together. Us versus them is not going to help it. Emmanuel Macron wants a French version of Islam, and I think he has faced a lot of criticism in the Western press, and the French media are quite angry about that. Why the Western press are treating Emmanuel Macron this way? Why they're being so hostile? Because everyone in France seems to be behind the president, and no one can see what's wrong. But if you come from the outside, clearly you can compare it to many things. A lot of French media houses are talking about how the New York Times and Washington Post have been very critical of Emmanuel Macron's response, because he's been very defiant, digging in his heels and how he wants to go forward. He wants to reform Islam to a more French open version of. Sorry, you want to say something?
Yes, that was the question I wanted to ask you. For the benefit of our audience who don't know, earlier this month, President Macron talked about bringing in a law that would perhaps, like Delano said, reform Islam in France. And the question that was asked, and this included, getting all of the imams to be certified by the French government, have them teach in French, have them also sign a declaration of secularism, keep a closer eye on the places of worship. The question that was asked was, why is this being done to one religion specifically? And that's my question to you. Are there similar rules for all of the religions inside of France?
I cannot answer that question in terms of all religions, but I know that this has been a very, very a hot button issue, really, because Emmanuel Macron knows that, again, going back to looking at the election coming ahead in 2022, he knows that this will play into the far right will use, past terror attacks, will use issues of division to garner their base. So Emmanuel Macron theoretically wants a more neutral, form of Islam. And he did give an interview to Al Jazeera in Arabic, actually, a couple of days ago, where he spoke about how, certain things should not fly in France, regardless of whether you're Christian or Muslim, but you're in France. So girls, for instance, should have the same opportunities as boys in this country, regardless, because you're French. If you don't believe that, there's no room for you in this country. This is what he said, and it was, I think, again, a very well-delivered speech from the president. Obviously, Emmanuel Macron trying to dial back the tensions in the aftermath of that attack, which we saw in Nice. Even when he arrived at the scene in Nice, after those 3 people were killed, he never mentioned cartoons. Because we have seen the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan accuse the French president of Islamophobia. We had the Turkish president who said Emmanuel Macron needed to get his head checked, call for a boycott of French goods. We had those protests break out in numerous parts of the world, including in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Lebanon even. But Emmanuel Macron was defiant, but he didn't capitulate, but he was somber and softer, I would say.
All right. Delano, many thanks for joining us here and helping us understand what's going on in France. I wish you good luck. And thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you. Good to see you.